In this episode, focusing on elite leadership, I will be speaking to two special guests. Troy E. Black, former senior enlisted advisor to the chairman of the U.S. Joint Chiefs of Staff, and alongside Troy, returning special guest, executive coach, leadership consultant, speaker, and senior vice president at Decision Reflex, John Nair. My name is Paul Aladenika, and you are listening to the 11th Thing podcast. Now, on to my special guest for this episode of the 11th Thing podcast. Troy E. Black is a highly decorated U.S. Marine Corps leader who served as the 5th Senior Enlisted Advisor to the Chairman of the U.S. Joint Chiefs of Staff from 2023 to 2025, after previously serving as the 19th Sergeant Major of the Marine Corps. Born in Louisville, Kentucky, he enlisted in the Marines in 1988 and rose from recruiting training at Marine Corps Recruit Depot Paris Island to the highest enlisted leadership positions in the U.S. military. Across nearly 4 decades of service, Troy Black held frontline combat training and strategic leadership roles, including machine gunner and weapons platoon leader, drill instructor and drill master, operations chief and first sergeant, and senior enlisted leader for major Marine combat and logistical units. His operational experience spans some of the most significant U.S. military missions of the modern era, including Operation Just Cause, the Gulf War, Operation Iraqi Freedom, Operation Enduring Freedom, and Operation Inherent Resolve. He deployed globally throughout his career, from the Mediterranean and Bahrain to Iraq and Afghanistan, leading Marines in both combat and expeditionary operations. What makes Troy Black's story particularly significant is the breadth of his leadership journey, from tactical battlefield roles to becoming the senior enlisted advisor to the highest military leadership in the United States, representing the voice, welfare, readiness, and professional standards of enlisted service members across the entire U.S. Armed Forces. Troy Black's personal awards include the Navy Distinguished Service Medal, Legion of Merit with 2 Gold Stars, the Bronze Star with Combat Distinguishing Device, Meritorious Service Medal with 2 Gold Stars, Navy and Marine Corps Commendation Medal with Combat Distinguishing Device and 3 Gold Stars, Navy and Marine Corps Achievement Medal with Gold Star, and the Combat Action Ribbon with 2 Gold Stars. Troy Black has a Bachelor of Science in Terrorism and Counterterrorism Studies from National American University and graduated from the Joint Special Operations Forces Senior Enlisted Academy in December of 2011. My second special guest is actually a returning special guest, John Nair, who as an executive business coach and leadership consultant leverages over 30 years of expertise in consulting and leadership development across various industries. His most impactful contributions have been in coaching and consulting for top financial advisors and executives in North America and Europe, where he has partnered with prestigious firms such as McKinsey & Company, American Express, and Wells Fargo. John's extensive experience includes overseeing consulting assignments with leading organizations, where he has honed his skills in leadership development and strategic planning. As a district manager and field vice president for Ameriprise Financial, he was instrumental in recruiting and mentoring high-performing advisors, fostering their growth through tailored coaching programs. Additionally, his work in developing innovative technology-driven training programs for firms like LPL, Nestwise, showcases his commitment to enhancing advisor capabilities. A proud Marine Corps veteran, John embodies the core principles of Marine Corps leadership, emphasizing discipline, integrity, and teamwork. John Nair and Troy Black, welcome to this episode of the 11th Thing podcast. It's great to have you both on.
It's great to be here, Paul. Thanks so much for having us. It's an honor.
Yeah, Paul, thank you. It's going to be a good time here. I'm really looking forward to the engagement with you and John. Thank you very, very much.
Excellent. Let's dive straight in with some definitions, or with a definition. Can I ask, and I'll ask you first, Troy, can you define elite leadership? What does it mean to you?
Elite leadership. I'm writing this down as we go here so I can make sure I make a good PowerPoint presentation of all the things you and John say so I can get smarter. Elite leadership. Um, it would seem like a very easy phrase to sort of define. And I think that it is. I think there's complexity and we'll get into that. But what is elite leadership? Elite leadership is a team, first of all. It's not an individual. Elite leadership is a team of people who are, one, able to establish and represent a culture, right? That's focused on accomplishing their mission or task. Could be a business, could be a sports team, right? That takes into consideration the balance between achieving success in that task and how they take care of their people, right? And so that seems very foundational and fundamental, but the people that can achieve that balance, and I think how I would describe the elite portion of it is understanding the balance. You can be a great leader and have those two things out of balance, the task and the mission and quality of life and the people, and it's no longer elite. Successful teams do both exceptionally well, and I think that's fundamentally what I think elite leadership is.
John, what about you?
Yeah, great. I love this conversation, by the way, and hearing from Troy, who's, lived most of his career, or very much most of his career, lived elite leadership. And so, when you talk about an organization like the U.S. Marine Corps and what they put into developing leaders and the accountability and response, like if you're not performing at elite leadership at the ranks that Troy, specifically in this case, attained, you don't stay in the Marine Corps. You don't keep getting promoted. And so I think, as Troy kind of alluded to, we could do an entire course or courses on what elite leadership is. At Decision Reflex, we have what we call a leadership evolution model. And at the top of that continuum, because it is, right, it is a continuum, but some specific characteristics that include elite leader or elite leadership people do some specific things. They do everything you would think of that a good leader should do, right? And then on top of that, they're excellent or elite at mobilizing a group of people around a common cause to drive a desired result consistently, and then ultimately without their involvement, meaning when the cat's away in a bad culture, the mice will play. An elite leadership culture, the leader could be in Europe or South America for 6 weeks or 6 months, and elite leadership culture will continue to drive the mission at a level of excellence. And Troy alluded to or said that an elite leadership is developing other leaders. The purpose of leadership is not to develop followers, it's to develop more leaders, leaders leading leaders to leadership. And the other thing that elite leaders do is tie everything always back to the vision, mission, values, and I would say the why, Simon Sinek, the why, um, all the time. And so we can expand on that as we go. Uh, but by the way, before we jumped on here, you were talking with Troy for a second about the difference between 37 years of hair on, well, can't say hair on fire anymore, but very busy, purposeful activity versus retired in civilian life. And Troy said, staying busy. And so like the why, the purpose, elite leaders, if they start to feel a lack of purpose, they feel something is out of alignment. Elite leaders work diligently to make sure everybody in the organization can live in alignment with the vision, mission, and values of the why of the organization. And so I think elite leaders do just that. They work diligently, in addition to the other things I mentioned, to make sure everyone in the organization can live in alignment with the vision, mission, and values of the organization, the why. Doesn't mean their top values have to be the same as the organization's, but it does mean they have to be able to live and operate, work in alignment with those vision, mission, values, and why. So I think elite leaders do all those things consistently.
Thanks for that, John. Let's move on now to character. Let's talk a little bit about character, and it's a question to you, Troy, to begin with. Um, how can organizations function effectively without trust? I mean, you spent 37 years in the military. Trust is an important character trait of the military institution and of the leaders who operate within that institution. How important is trust in the context of elite leadership as a binding agent, as a cultural ecosystem?
Great question, Paul. You know, a lot of what John just described, and I didn't unintentionally make it more concise because I know John would expand on this topic a little bit, especially the piece about culture. In my mind, everything John just talked about was a framework of culture, right? And so putting the word out there and letting it get expanded upon, I think is important. And it comes now to your piece about trust. I'll make a bold statement. There are two types of culture, good ones and bad ones. There's no perfectly wrong one, and there's no perfectly right one, but there's good ones and bad ones, right? In the good cultures, no matter what it is, pick your environment, pick your community, pick your whatever, business. Trust is the only thing that determines whether a culture is good or culture is bad, in my view. And so on trust, how do you develop trust, I think is a more challenging and complex problem set. However, John knows this, and I'll steal some United States Marine Corps terminology that won't surprise anybody. We've got things called leadership principles and traits, right? Traits are like one-letter words. Judgment, justice, dependability, integrity, decisiveness. These are one-letter or one-word descriptions of how you should act. Then there are principles. Know yourself and seek self-improvement. Take care of your people and look out for their welfare. Be technically and tactically proficient. And here's my favorite one. It talks about trust. Set the example. So if I want my people to come to work on time, I must be there on time. It sounds like something simple, but if you want people to trust you and be accountable and hold them accountable, you yourself have to have self-discipline. Discipline's a leadership trait. All right. You have to be able to exhibit the discipline you expect others. Now, I know in the military, we believe there's an extreme form of that versus maybe in the civilian sector or outside of a uniform. But I got to tell you, as you rise through the ranks in the military, you have less and less people making sure you're doing the right thing. Till ultimately you get to some of the places that I was very fortunate to have the opportunity to serve. No one's telling me what time to come to work. No one's telling me my schedule. Nobody's making sure that I'm doing the right things. As a result of that, I'm hopeful that I was doing the right things and I was building trust in my team, and people trusted me to execute missions around the world on behalf of really the United States of America. And so to build that trust, you have to have a culture, and you have to be self-reliant, self-disciplined first. So you can set the example for others in your organization to trust you, and so that you can trust them.
John, let me pick up on the point that Troy has made there. Really, really insightful, because what Troy has done is essentially set the foundations, and he has described how trust essentially is almost like a social currency and can exponentially improve and empower not just elite leadership, but the impact that a leader has on their teams. Let me flip that on its head just for a moment and pose a question to you. What happens in organizations when leaders replace trust with fear? So instead of that leading by example, this is what you do, this is how you do it, they resort to direction and instruction and threat.
Absolutely. Yes. So to Troy's point, I'll make a really concise, quick overall point, and then I'll expand on it just a little bit, but I'll try to be efficient with my words. So ultimately, when fear replaces trust in a culture, ultimately retention goes down. Kind of obvious, but a couple things stop happening. People, when fear is replaces trust, people stop taking even calculated risks. They because there's not permission to try and fail. There's not permission to think outside the box. And so I also think a lot of our clients, both their organizations, their businesses, and the leaders' personal values, a common word we see in top five values is integrity. And so a lot of people use that word integrity, and you cannot have trust without integrity. And you mentioned character. Does character matter? Um, Troy started listing off Marine Corps leadership traits, and as he said, one words, the acronym, because the Marine Corps has to have an acronym for everything, but it's JJ did tie buckle. And as he was saying, so each of those JJ, JJDID, etc., is the first letter. But all of those, they're not just leadership traits, they're character traits, right? And so character is essential. I think everything ties back ultimately to integrity. And Stephen Covey said, Stephen Covey said in the Speed of Trust book, he said, where trust exists, things move faster and become less expensive, become cheaper ultimately. Yeah, which is interesting. So in the reverse of that, where you have a fear culture, because there's not somewhere integrity is breaking down, somewhere trust is breaking down. Because if I fear my leader, I probably don't trust them, right? And so somewhere in the communication and the execution, that breaks down, and also things ultimately become more expensive, not because they take longer to get the production done, but I mentioned retention, losing people, not having retention. One of my mentors says retention is the foundation of growth. Lack of retention is very expensive. So fear in the short run, and Troy can chime in on this, in some times, in some cultures, in the Marine Corps, he can speak much more directly to this, but some Marine Corps leaders, sometimes in history, have at least at times led by fear. I'll let him expand on that. But in business specifically, everything starts to break down. You might get some short-term results, for a day or a week, but long term, it will destroy a culture.
I remember it's really interesting because there's a really powerful point of intersection between trust and discipline as well. I remember several years ago, Peter Schoonmaker, I think he was head of the U.S. Army at the time. He was giving evidence to Congress, and he said that discipline is doing the right thing when no one is looking,
Yes.
and you have to believe that if you're the leader and you are not looking, it's because you trust the people that you've left behind. So yeah, go
Yeah.
ahead, Troy. Go ahead, Troy.
Oh,
Mhm.
this is great. Here's why it's great. Um, Authority and authoritative are not the same thing,
Hmm.
right? Follower and followership, not effective for building organizations, in my opinion. And I can explain why. But as Paul or as John and I talk about these fundamental character aspects, which is the pivotal part of the culture that you're talking about in elite leaders, I would just go so far as to say elite leadership and elite leaders aren't the same thing either, right? There's people that can do it, and then there's what it should be. There's expectation. So let me just define this really, really quick. We talk about these leadership traits, um, and I'll run down them just for the record, right? Let me see if I can pull off my JJ did tie buckle, John, without messing this up, right? Judgment, justice, dependability, initiative, enthusiasm, tact, integrity, endurance, bearing, unselfishness, courage, knowledge, loyalty, and enthusiasm. These aren't just what you should expect of me as a leader. These are what I'm expecting of you so that you can develop your leadership, not be a follower. Doing them doesn't mean you're following me because I do them. Doing them and exhibiting those things is because you're preparing yourself to be a leader. It's my expectation, the leader of you, much as if you are responsible for me, Paul, or John, you expect those things out of me in order to determine whether and I can talk about culture and indicators of effective leadership as well, which is what we're really diving into, is if I'm doing the right thing, but more so if you're doing the right thing. It's reciprocal. There's not one or the other. Authority and authoritative. People may disagree with this, but there are times to be authoritative. Shut up
Hmm.
and color might be needed at a certain point of time, especially during chaos, friction, to gain and sustain momentum, to take and accept risk. Someone has to say, thank you, it's time to move forward. That's authoritative. The thing is, what gives me the authority to implement that action?
Hmm.
Authority. My responsibility, my position, my training, education, experience, my history, the fact that a board of directors elected me to be this in this position or what have you, I have been given authority. How I exhibit it is a different thing. Really quickly in closing, I know John wants to weigh in here, but indicators of effective leadership. Here's where the elite leadership and how you can test it and see it works. If I'm doing the good thing, and I'm using myself as the example, it's not to be pejorative, but I'm using myself as the example. Um, if I am in a position that in my organization that there is morale, motivation, esprit de corps, proficiency, and discipline, I am doing the right thing. Those are the things that are displayed from the organization, or it could be the three of us. One of us is in charge. If the other two have morale, response is motivation. We are a team together with one single focus, proficiency in all things, and we are disciplined in our actions and process and thinking and how we carry ourselves and have expectations of others. This is an indication of effective leadership. We can go down the bad side of that as well. That'll come out what an elite leader is not, right? We probably should touch on that. But in that scope of things, I think it really connects the question you're asking, Paul, and a lot of the things that John's bringing out at least in how I've viewed it. And these are things I've learned. These aren't things that I was born with any more than anybody else. But they're observations of what I think answers your original question. What is elite leadership? Thanks.
John, do you want to add to that?
Just briefly. So, that was great, and so I think we've covered really well why. So, to Troy's point about authoritative, but all that eventually breaks down if there's not trust there. So, if there's trust, character, and accountability. To his point, 360 degrees.
Yeah.
So when trust and not uh, fear maybe in sense as a high respect for my leader, but not fear of them. So trust, character, accountability. And Troy earlier talked about the leader actually caring and taking care of their people, right? And so, yeah, I may have to be very directive. That's situational leadership, right? Right. But if the leader, if the follower, just to use that term, or subordinate leader, better term, knows that their leader cares about them, knows that they can trust them, knows that they're committed to excellence, and knows the commander's intent. Troy can get into that later. Um, then accountability, and to Troy's, I love love Troy's point of leadership traits are not just for the senior most leader, they're for everyone.
Yeah.
Everyone's a leader because everyone has influence and everyone should be developing in their all their skill sets, but their character included in that. And so when that all exists, that's trust over fear. And accountability is not a bad word in
Mm.
that type of culture. Accountability actually becomes a very good word because I know that Troy is developing me in my best interest, but all that is in alignment with the organization as well. So I, I think, one last thing. You talked about discipline is what happens when no one else is looking. I've always heard, I think that fits very well. I've always heard, though, that character is what happens when no one else is looking. Like reputation versus character. So someone might have a reputation for an elite leader, but when nobody else is looking, or they think nobody else is looking, character is what really matters. So I think it's crucial, essential if you're going to be the right type of leader. And last point is um, it's it's nice to be trusted. It's more important to be trustworthy. So that's trustworthiness is definitely a character trait. That's who you really are. So I have so much respect for the senior enlisted advisor to the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, but can I trust him? I don't know unless I've interacted with him enough to know that he is absolutely trustworthy in our relationship, right?
Hey, Paul, can I put a fine point on this just really quick? 'Cause I know you want to move on to something else, but something I've learned from, John as, he's mentored me the last couple of months, especially from the decision reflex point of view, and it's the importance of values. I think, and when we get to the point about what a leader should not be, I think that's where we have the deeper discussion on values, right? Values are universal. I don't think they're not uh, being exposed to many different cultures, but we can talk about that in detail. But that trustworthiness comes from having values, exhibiting those values,
Hmm.
and people observing the fact that you believe in your very own values. It seems something simple, but we can talk about that in a moment. Last point is on discipline and fear. Fear, wrong. Being authoritative has a place, and they're not the same thing, right? On discipline, how we've grown up defining it, me and John in our experience together, the instant willing obedience to all orders, respect for authority. This is a generational challenge. And the bigger challenge is the last and most important part of discipline is a definition, a defined term, self-reliance. Take care of thyself before telling others to take care of themselves. It's kind of like hypocrisy, right? Don't be a hypocrite. And we can talk about that more when we get into the negative side of leadership. Thanks.
That's brilliant. I could easily spend the time of this podcast on this subject. It is so rich and so deep, and your insights are brilliant. But I'm going to leave it with just this quote, which is that I know earlier on I reflected on the a quote of General Peter Schoonmaker that discipline is doing the right thing when no one is looking. I would advance that ever so slightly. I would be as impudent as to do that, which is to say that discipline is doing the right thing even if nobody cared, because the idea that someone is looking suggests that they
Even
care.
better.
So there's an accountability. If nobody actually cares, it means that if they didn't care that you did it or not, would you still do it? So there you go. Can we just move on now? John, you mentioned earlier the why. the importance of the why. Um, and I just want to explore that with you, John, to begin with. Why do so many organizations lose sight of their mission? And what I'm trying to get to here, John, is why is clarity and purpose so important in shaping a culture of elite leadership?
hmm Yeah, I think there can be a whole host of reasons why individual leaders, entrepreneurs, executives can lose sight of their mission. Some of those are character based, and Troy does a nice job of outlining that the character side very specifically. I'll let him do that. One of my highly successful entrepreneurial friends has been talking a lot about lately about this concept of the woman in the red dress. And it's basically the bright, shiny object. And so lot of, entrepreneurs, executives are, working however many hours a week, and they're doing all the things, and sometimes by nature of wanting to lead, drive, achieve, they're having some success in the mission, and this woman in the red dress walks by and they're like, oh, let's try that. And so this specific entrepreneur, founder, CEO, he said he almost lost his business, 12, 13 years ago, and he had to learn the hard way to say no. Say no to the woman in the red dress if that's not the one, if that's not the mission. And so mission drift, just we're all flawed human beings. And so we're all susceptible to human nature. But so when it's not a character issue, sometimes it's just, well, let's try this. Let's try this. It's the idea du jour. Um, and we see that with our clients. And so in our goal achievement model that we help clients with, the last 2 points are something that coaches can help them with: control direction and throw off discouragement. And sometimes throwing off discouragement is actually being lured by the bright, shiny squirrel in the movie, right? So I think a lot of entrepreneurs have a little bit of ADHD sometimes. And so having a little bit of accountability to someone say, hey, let's not, this is mission drift, and that's not what we're doing. Let's stay blinders on the mission. So
Troy, what are your thoughts on this?
John took us in a lot of good directions. Let's see if we're all paying attention. What was the original question?
Why do so many organizations lose sight of their mission?
Yeah, and I didn't say that to start an argument. John gave a great example of mission drift, right? What's the north on the compass? Right? What is the task and the mission, right? And then we get into how do you stay on that task, or how do you trust the person leading us down this path, and all the things we talked about previously. If I could bring it around and take it 90 degrees to the right, but bring us back to true north on this character issue, I think it's relevant here.
hmm
And so I mentioned a moment ago the things you shouldn't do as a leader, right? I would call them the five fingers of death. I've been told that death is not a good word outside of a uniform, but I'm going to stick with it because it has impact, right? Um, Immoral, unethical, unsafe, unjust, unprofessional. Think of the three things that we all know. There's no book written on them, but we know them off the like the back of a napkin. What's the three things that gets the boss in trouble? Money, right? Inappropriate relationships, and substance abuse, usually alcohol, right? Is that immoral, unethical, unsafe, unjust, or unprofessional? Probably all of those things. And so When we talk about trust, we talk about delegation, we talk about up and down the leadership chain, how you develop, how you bring forward legacy, and we can talk about how you develop leadership in a moment. How do you establish a zero defect mentality in your organization where no one can make mistakes or else you're fired? Or do we experiment and innovate and understand that learning is part of the process of making mistakes, not mistakes or failure to learn, right? And then I think the last thing I would mention is, boy, if you've ever worked in a startup company before, the amount of enthusiasm and ability to take risk and having someone that has the vision to bring a group of people together and start from zero with no capital, just an idea. And then fast forward 20 or 30 years, if the same group is still together and see what that looks like. A lot less risk taking, more on profit margin. Do we fire people to save profit because manpower is expensive? Do we do a Kodak model and say film's here forever? We can't get into the digital age because we're best at what we do and you fail miserably. How does all of that look over time? If there's one leadership trait that I would think is important over time, and I'll make a bold statement, I'm just making this up right now as we're talking, it's probably enthusiasm is the one thing that allows good leadership, exceptional leadership to maintain its eliteness. It's being enthused about getting up every day and doing it, not coming and going, okay, we need to make no mistakes today. That just that kills the morale and the motivation. You lose a spree. You become inefficient or unproficient somewhere. And at the end of the day, people just show up and go, yeah, I got to be here today. And we're not going to do anything important, but I'm getting a paycheck. So whether I sit here in my shorts or come dressed like I'm part of my protocol for the organization I'm working for and maintain discipline, whatever. Enthusiasm. I think that's a big piece of how we lose our way sometimes as well.
Troy, I'm just going to stick with you for a moment because I'm picking up a really clear thread here. Because in many ways, I mean, what you've described, what both yourself and John have described is the importance of the why, the importance of clarity, the importance of a clear, purposeful vision. But just going back to your earlier question, would it be fair to say that it really doesn't matter how clear your why is if I don't trust you?
No one cares what your why is if they don't trust you.
Yeah.
Right. So look at, and I'm very hesitant to use my experience, right? But um, I am a United States Marine Corps infantryman. Safe to say, I may have been in combat a couple of times. Okay. If someone is put in a responsible position, a commanding officer, and they say, we are going to go in that direction, there is an enemy force there. They are capable of causing us great harm, up to and including death, right? And follow me. Well, you're going to follow no matter what because you have to. The difference is following that person into that environment. No one wants to, but because you trust that individual to make decisions that are going to, this is my original point. This is the heart of mission and task accomplishment and the troop welfare or taking care of your people piece, right? I know that this person making these decisions, whether it's in the military and the example that I give or anywhere, there are going to be decisions that must keep us moving forward and keep us going forward in the right direction. It's going to come at risk to me as the individual, but I trust that once we're in, have our momentum, that individual making the decisions is going to have me in consideration and all of my peers and all the rest of the personnel and the people that are part of this organization in accomplishing that task. But at the end of the day, getting the job done, it's the 1A of the 1A and 1B conversation, right? And so the yin and the yang, at some point in time, they're spinning in circles, but we're all going in a direction. You cannot do that. You can't take personal risk on someone else's behalf. You can't follow someone who's going to take risk now that may harm you as an individual unless you trust them. Not just in the combat scenario that I'm trying to paint, but in every scenario. I make crazy analogies, but let me just make a last one. We've all been in the car with someone and they're the driver. Okay. You may trust someone one time. There are people you will never drive with again the rest of your life. You'll always say, no, I got it. I'll drive. Because you may like them, but you don't trust them. Bad analogy, but I think it may be applicable.
Thank you so much, Troy. John, if I can just ping the next question to you to begin with, and it focuses on um, how leadership is directed and focused in organizations. Some organizations prefer a sort of a centralized approach, others prefer a more sort of federated approach. Both have their advantages at different times. Centralization might work in particular situations where there is a high level of risk, and you need to have a proper, clear route of escalation in terms of decision making. A federalized approach might work where you're looking to promote centers of innovation at the point where people are closest to the decision. It would be interesting to get your thoughts, John, to begin with, about centralizing the negative aspects of centralized leadership. Why do you think, or do you have thoughts about the extent to which it might weaken modern organizations, and what the dangers potentially of over centralization or over centralized leadership might be?
Yes. So I think this is a really important topic. It's really timely. At Decision Reflex, we see with our clients and other people we talk to that it's actually a combination of two main factors, I think. So the over centralization, including decision making, with how well they train and develop people throughout their organization. Meaning, if you have over centralized decision making and you don't train and develop your and enable your people, then you run into issues quicker. What do I mean by that? When you have both over centralization and you don't trust your people, then they're going to stop taking initiative. They're going to stop solving problems on their own. They're going to stop thinking outside the box. Or I heard somebody say, thinking bigger or making the box bigger. Not thinking outside the box, but in some organizations, you just have to hope to make the box bigger. But those three things, but which are variances of losing trust, essentially. So you, we talked earlier about having 360-degree accountability. Yeah, so and Troy talked about authoritative versus authoritarianism. I think authoritarianism tends to exist when you have over centralized decision making, you don't trust your people, you don't develop them. These are, we're not talking about recruits in Marine Corps camp where the only answer is instant willingness, obedience to all orders, sir. Um, Troy, I'll get it. Instant willingness and obedience to all orders, respect for authority, and self-reliance, sir. When in organizations, as we're developing subordinate leaders, it can't be just that. And so, we in our leadership evolution model, we want to get everybody in an organization to the point where they start solving some of their own problems, right? We want to enable and empower people to take appropriate calculated risks, come up with some at least potential solutions. Doesn't mean they're making the final decision all the time, but they at least have some potential solutions to the issues that they're facing on the ground in their role, and the ability to think outside the box. So I think those are some of the initial dangers of over centralized decision making in an organization combined with not enough development of people for the win-win, not just, for the betterment of the organization.
Troy, let me throw the flip side of that question to you. Why do you think distributed leadership is so important in the context of organizational resilience?
Rhetorical question. How many dictatorships are successful? Right? They are for a period of time,
Yeah.
usually through their rise, and then things get real, right?
Mm.
And the brilliant person with the brilliant idea and the ability to um, eliminate their threats, have full control, ultimately fail. Here's the reason why. Trust, one, right? Dictators, authoritarians don't trust anybody because they think they're always out to get them. They're always trying to get rid of their people that don't agree with them, that give them opposite view, that give them perspective, right? Through history, and look at a whole bunch of dictators that great during their rise, all end in failure. We see them every day, even in a corporate world, right? And so, what are the dangers of that? And what's the advantage of distributing responsibility and tasks and responsibilities? Or successful organizations do that as part of their culture, part of their values. Example, you made a point a moment ago, Paul, in one of your questions about, the leader, uh, what their responsibilities are. I would say a leader, depending upon where you're at, but it's fundamentally the same. My job as the leader is not to tell you how to do something, it's to tell you where we're going,
Yep.
right? And John and I had I don't remember, it was an email string or a text chat on this a couple of weeks ago. If I'm in charge of a group of kids and we're walking on a trail, my job is to say, we're going north on this trail. Here's the trail, right? The 4 or 5 kids walking with me might go, well, there's a stream over there. One of them takes off and goes to the stream, comes back with water. Success. My job is to make sure we continue to walk north on the trail, right? And so if you can't delegate responsibility, you delegate responsibility, you don't delegate authority. Going back to my authority point, if you're someone who's responsible, again, my crazy analogies, parents, I am a parent. I cannot delegate my responsibility as a parent to my kids, right? I can delegate my responsibilities to them to teach them to how to become parents one day. And if I don't do that, if I'm a helicopter parent, do everything for them and give them no responsibility, give them no ability to succeed and fail and learn, right?
Hmm.
They're never going to be good parents.
Hmm.
Same thing for leadership. In fact, being a parent is probably one of the most daunting leadership challenges that exist on the planet. And so if you don't delegate, ultimately as the leader, you can't focus on the big picture. John talked about making the problem bigger. I'm a big fan of a former chairman of our Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Dunford. And he said, anytime I have a problem, I don't solve it by solving that problem. I solve it by making the problem bigger so that I don't leave any one perspective out and I don't actually eliminate challenges that I know I have to overcome. I can't focus on one thing. I've got to focus on the actual greater problem. But ultimately, here's the moral of the story. I, as an individual, you as an individual, can't do all of those things. You have to delegate the ability to solve the problems and then maintain your authority as the decision maker. Okay, I've got all perspectives. I delegate all responsibility to give me information and perspectives. Now I have all this information. I have the authority and responsibility to make a decision. Continue to go north or adjust 3 degrees to the right, or maybe stop, go around, turn around backwards, come back. But I have the authority to do that if I delegate my responsibility to others to help inform me. It's kind of a lot of a word jumble, but it's easy practice. Trust others to help you make the right decisions.
Um, John, let me just pick up on a point that Troy has made. Um, Really important point. The role of trust again, coming up again, the character point. being
Mhm.
important in the context of distributed leadership. What do you say to the leader who says, well, yeah, I understand distributed leadership, I get it, but I'm worried about unevenness. I'm concerned about standards. I want to ensure that across the organization we have some adherence to standards. And this thing about distributed leadership, well, you get different people across the organization doing different things, and I'm worried that it might create a lack of uniformity. What do you say to that leader?
Yeah, it's a we're actually seeing this playing out in real life, especially here in the States. I think you and I have talked about this before, that the average age of a senior executive or entrepreneur, business or organization leader in the United States is early to mid 60s right now, because this whole baby boomer effect. And so when you think about a guy or a lady over the last 30, 35, approaching 40 years, that's built a business, and a lot of our clients are in this case, literally all they've done for 30, 35 years is build their business and raise their family. That's it. And so, but now all those people, what's their number one issue? They are looking for their exit. Well, you cannot have an exit without some kind of succession and continuity plan, right? And so, but some combination, most organizations, the combination, they either didn't have or take the time, the expertise, the desire, the passion, the resources that they felt they didn't have those things to develop their people. And they think they can do that in the last few months before their exit. You can't. You should have been doing it at least 20, 25 years ago. Worst case scenario. You should have been doing it all along. But most people don't naturally do that. So, but to directly to your point, you should be developing your people, but we started off this conversation with elite leaders tie everything back to the vision, mission, values of the organization all the time. So we've also alluded throughout this entire conversation, we've been all around teams, organizations, everybody 360 degrees being in alignment. And what we're really talking about is what happens when all these things, these character traits, these personal development things are in alignment, and when they're not. And you feel that. And but when you wait 20, 25 years to try to start doing it, then you really feel that it becomes overwhelming. So all that to say, you're Stephen Covey talks about seek the win-win. He also begin with the end in mind, be proactive. So like all of but the eighth habit was also find your voice and help others find theirs too. And so I think a short answer to your question is, as you develop your people, you ensure that you're helping them get what they want for themselves in on their career path, checking in with them, making sure that they're in alignment with their values and the organization's, but tying everything always back to vision, mission, values, the why of the organization, not allowing that mission drift, and not allowing, not I would say not allowing in a authoritarian way, but in a leaderful way, making sure. But also it comes trust. Troy talked very eloquently about trust and accountability being 360 degrees. It's not just one directional. So if you have to the leader, in this case I'm talking about entrepreneurs and senior executives, trust your development of your people and develop them in a way that you continue to trust them and not fear them. Troy talked about parenting. Every decent parent wants their children to become better at something better overall than themselves. I would submit that elite leaders want to develop leaders that become greater than them. But so I started off this conversation with the things that elite leaders do. So they tie everything back to the vision, mission, values, the why, always, every time. They mobilize a group of people around a common cause to drive a desired result, but they can't be the peak. They can't be elite if they're not continually, intentionally, proactively developing people. And and so you if you're doing all the things that I just mentioned, there shouldn't be any presence of fear of these subordinate leaders, or gen we talk about Gen 3, that there's got to be trust there that they're going to. Troy talked about commander's intent. There's a great book. I'm trying to remember the exact title. It's essentially, though, the founder's intent. So as you develop people, they should, if they're not chasing their own woman in the red dress, like, I think that's a job of the leader to teach them, learn from other people's mistakes. Hey, in this organization, we don't chase the woman in the red dress. As you develop, Troy, in your leadership, the five fingers of death, let me help you avoid the five fingers of death. Let me help you learn from my mistakes, and not chase the woman in the red dress, because it'll take you and the organization down a wrong path. Am I answering your question, Paul?
Yeah, I'm
Oh,
happy. I'm happy with that. Troy, you wanted to jump in.
just a quick thought. I was working with an organization. Actually, somebody asked me to help them work with an organization a couple months ago, and the um, mm, I created the organization back in the 1970s. Is now at the point where, actually 80s, is now at the point where John's talking about time to retire, getting tired, right? And the primary problem they're trying to solve is legacy. Who do I have replace me? And it wasn't something that I'd created or thought of, but I asked the individual. They have a very extensive hiring process. It takes almost a year for their hiring process before they bring someone on. And I asked them, "Are you hiring people?" Be careful because I don't want to name the company. It's an architecture company. Are you hiring architects, or are you hiring people who are eventually going to become leaders of your organization?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Right? And the obvious question is, I'm hiring architects. Absolutely. But hire every single architect as though they're going to be the person that takes over your job or your successor's job or their job. I said the really hard thing to do is accepting the fact that there's investment in time and money and resources in leadership development. And the vast majority of people are never going to successively be proficient. I mentioned proficiency a moment ago as an effective indicator of leadership in both being an architect and being a leader.
Mm-hmm.
And that's okay.
So,
But where I came up with that is I had put a thing out in my time as the Sergeant Major of the Marine Corps on organizational change, but there are non-negotiables. And I listed a bunch of them that are very specific to the Marine Corps. But the one thing that I think is universal is a non-negotiable is leadership and leadership development. Unless you invest in being a leader and you invest in developing leaders, you're not going to know who's going to be your successor. You're just not going to. And often I find in the last probably 20 or 30 years, we would rather take and hire outside our organization to a proven leader somewhere else because it's easier, right? Someone else takes the risk and they're looking for opportunity, but we don't always invest inside of our organization to develop leadership. We just don't. And so I think that investment in leadership and leadership development is a non-negotiable. And it's all the things I'm learning right now with decision reflex. All right. That's predominantly there's the answer to the question. Be a leader and develop successors. Okay, pretty good method for success.
One
Brilliant
one
response.
sentence, one
Sure.
sentence only, Paul. Peter Drucker, a management guru, said, if you think training and developing your people is expensive, you should try not doing it.
Good answer. Good point. Excellent point. Troy, I'm going to stick with you for my next question, um, which is basically about decision making and particularly the characteristics of elite leaders in terms of their ability and capacity to make good decisions under pressure. What are your thoughts and perspectives on this?
This is probably the most important question, and not to overemphasize it. Again, part of my example, right? But let me use it because I think it answers your question. Um, when I had the opportunity to be selected to be the sergeant major of the U.S. Marine Corps, the first thing I did was I asked all of my predecessors, uh, give me some advice. And every single one of them said, it's not so much what your commandant and your vision is for the Marine Corps, it's what are you going to do when adversity happens? Because it happened to all of us, right? And so, um, for my boss, the then commandant of the Marine Corps, he took on the task of complete organizational innovation, bringing the U.S. Marine Corps into the modern era and moving it forward for warfare of the future. Again, this isn't about warfare, it's about organizational change and leadership. And it gets to your exact question. And so he issues his guidance. We're going to do things we've always done. We're going to stop doing some things that we have always done, and we're going to do new things with this organization, the Marine Corps, U.S. Marine Corps. And then adversity struck, social unrest, presidential election, COVID. Uh, not to get political, but it's about adversity. Afghanistan withdrawal. There's a budget reapprovals. All of these things that were going on, outside influence from former military leaders that were like, this is beyond what we should be doing. We're fundamentally changing the organization. Again, it's not about the U.S. Marine Corps, but it's about the leader who had a vision, who figured out, okay, I'm going to handle all these diversions that have to be tackled, but my goal is still the right goal. And being able to work through adversity, but still maintain your ability to achieve the task that not that you've created for yourself, but is the task at hand, is probably one of the hardest things for anybody to do. What people usually do is they either completely change what their task is and go some other direction because they get distracted, or they ignore the challenges and the adversity and put themselves in a position that they can't now achieve the task. Being able to do both and maintain your focus on the direction you're going, probably something that the most elite, successful leaders are able to do.
That is brilliant. I would say, Troy, that you're faced with the new assignment. I would say your most important decision was a decision of humility because you asked for advice. You asked for advice on the road. You didn't mention that, but I picked that up based on your response. And humility is a wonderful character of leadership.
I wrote this down a minute ago. Humility, the difference between being, well, and not because I thought you were going to reference me. Thank you for that. Being humble and having humility is not being scared or being a coward,
Brilliant. Love
right?
that.
I've seen some people with great humility do some incredibly
Yeah.
courageous and fearless things.
Mhm.
Great point. Thank you.
John, I have a question for you relating to decision making, and it's more a sort of hypothesis to test. Um, some people say that crisis and pressure develops leaders. Others say that it reveals leaders. Which is it?
Yeah,
I
that's
can
a
I can
great
tell
question.
that Troy would really love to answer that question. But John, I'm passing it to you. What are your thoughts?
Yes, that's a great question. Interesting question. In in the CEO of Decision Reflex in his book entitled "Don't Wait for Someone Else to Fix It." There's actually a chapter one of the eight essentials, and it's specifically on decision making as a leader in crisis. So, how do you respond in crisis? And obviously, Troy also is uniquely equipped and experienced. Talk about decision making under pressure. Um, but so I believe that crisis or adversity or um, being needing to make a decision under pressure with competing and sometimes difficult to deal with emotions, right? I believe that that reveals character. So the analogy is um you squeeze an orange and what's inside comes out. I believe that under pressure, decision making, leadership, in the spotlight, um, when people are squeezed, what's inside, that's character comes out. And so, but I believe that leaders are developed. I don't believe that leaders are born, at least elite leaders. Are some people born with some characteristics and traits and personality types, or some DNA that can help them in their development as a leader? Maybe. I don't know enough to say, but I believe that leaders are developed. We don't come out of the womb very developed. So by the way, one of the common themes that we haven't talked like very explicitly about though is moral intelligence and moral competence. And that's so I think Troy used the term true north, but and he also talked about values. And so I think, when character includes values, but it also includes our morals. Do we have a moral compass? Um do we live in alignment with our own true north? And so character, as we've talked about throughout, really really matters in my opinion, really matters in leadership, really matters in people development, um and it really matters under pressure. And so like Troy's talked about in his roles, his final roles as Sergeant Major of the Marine Corps and senior enlisted advisor to the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, not only decision making under pressure or pressure including time pressure. Like Sergeant Major, you have 59 minutes and counting down to make this really important decision on national security, and it better be a good decision, and it has to be in 58 minutes. So like that's decision making under pressure with real life consequences, right? And so while every business decision doesn't always seemingly have that amount of consequence, like, but metaphorically, if you make enough bad decisions, your business might blow up, metaphorically, right? So I think decision making under pressure. By the way, the reason decision reflex is called what it is because we are hardwired emotionally. So this is part of our emotional and moral development as leaders. In Troy talked about he had basically alluded to the need to overcome oneself, right? And so we're hardwired to be emotional first. And that's biology. That's biology, not psychology. The a stimulus comes into the brainstem, and in 12 milliseconds it goes first to the signal goes to the amygdala, the most primitive part of the brain, the emotional center of our brain. So we're literally feeling before we're thinking. And so I'll ask your listeners to think about examples in their experiences in their own life. Someone cuts you off in traffic. You have a feeling, you can't control, you can't stop emotions from happening, nor should you. Can't control them, unless I haven't met anybody in 12 milliseconds. By the way, the blink of an eye is like 100 milliseconds. Don't hold me to the exact number, but 100 milliseconds is pretty, the blink of an eye is pretty fast. 12 milliseconds. And we are hardwired, literally, biologically, to be emotional first. We tend to, because 12 milliseconds is so fast, we tend to react versus respond. So if we can, slow our breathing, Troy can teach us some combat breathing techniques, but it's, slows the breathing, slows the heart rate, lets that signal go from the amygdala to the prefrontal cortex, the logical, rational thinking part of the brain, so we can slow ourselves down, even though now we only have 56 minutes left to make this decision, um, and reflect. So, decision reflex is instead of making reflexive emotionally reflexive decisions, we want to make reflective decisions. Reflect on what? Reflect on our values that Troy, reflect on our true north, reflect on our moral compass. What's the morally, ethically, legally win-win for the most people? Put everybody in the room. Reflect on those things. Take a beat. And so and then reframe. So, what are my options? What's the best option? So I put every stakeholder in the room, metaphorically, before coming up with ultimately the best response. And so that's creating, intentionally creating a reflective decision reflex or habit versus just responding emotionally. So, under pressure and under a time crunch, in the face of competing and sometimes difficult to deal with emotions, we've got to slow down, even though there is a time crunch. Think about what's most important. What's the woman in the red dress? What's my potential character pitfalls? But if I stay and marinate in my emotions, I'm literally less likely to make a good decision. So one thing that someone like Troy, Marines in general that have some level of training, but especially Troy can speak much more directly to this, but I've talked to a lot of Marines and special operators and special forces that develop by necessity. Some people use the term compartmentalization. So going all the way back to what Troy talked about, discipline, sir, discipline is instant willing obedience to all orders. In the business world, that sounds ludicrous. In combat, it sounds pretty darn good. So, but elite military operators or just infantry troops have the ability to compartmentalize. When when someone loses a buddy in the heat of the moment in combat, there's 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 empathy there, there's emotion there, but we don't have time that we're still in the middle of the firefight. So you have to compartmentalize. And I learned so it's not always to that extreme in business, right? But the importance of make sometimes you're right. They're the ultimately the impact. I'm saying it's not literal combat with
Yeah,
people
this
people
is not a
dying
disagreeing
around.
point. Not a
Yeah.
disagreeing point. And this is because I think it's important to be able to translate a military thing into a civilian thing. Orders are laws. They're not subjective. They're objective. In the corporate world, I would translate instant willing obedience to all orders to instant willing obedience to all laws. Because if I disobey an order, bad things happen. If we don't follow a law, we have the 2008 financial crisis.
Mhm.
Okay, so we have to keep it in context,
Yeah.
right? It's exactly the same thing. Change the words around. Just a quick break in. Paul, have you ever heard of the OODA loop? The OODA loop is a way of thinking. It operates not just in the military sense, though it was developed by an Air Force, U.S. Air Force veteran. It's how you keep yourself from not making, or it's how you keep yourself from being indecisive, which is your question that you asked. How do you react in crisis, right? Is it born or I would say it's both and. The OODA loop, four colors. And just think about this as we're thinking about in a business context, a military context, how you drive down the street in your car. If you drive around your car and you're in the white, your condition is in the white. You're not paying attention. You're looking at your phone. You're talking to your kids in the back seat. You're changing the radio. Somebody sent you a text. You're unaware, and a stop sign shows up. You make a bad decision. You're in the white. You're unaware. In the yellow, you're ready. You're driving, you're focused, you're 10 and 2 on the wheel. You're not playing with the text, right? But the kids in the background kind of making some noise, right? You're aware. And so you see the stop sign coming and you start to slow down. In the red, there's no stop sign. Someone runs out in the middle of the road and you're completely unaware of what's going on. You react, right? And then in the black, you're paying no attention at all. A crisis happens. You hit something while you're driving your car and you lose it. Which state should you be in to make good, decisive decisions in crisis?
You've got to be in the yellow, I think.
In the yellow. The majority of the world wanders around in the white and they never get the yellow or red when a crisis happens, and they always end up in the black and they're indecisive. And so, how do you get there? Training, education, life experience. Someone's always going to make a decision. How did they get there? We're all kids. We all played in the yard and the playground. There's always one kid on the playground at 4 years old that says, let's all go over here. And we all follow them. Is that born? I don't know. It's an instinct. Yes, it's an emotional. Exactly what John's saying. It's first emotional, but then you learn or you develop people who didn't display that emotion. You teach them that emotion. So now they can make responsible, decisive, informed decisions and not bend to the chaos of the collapse of the financial market, driving their car, gas prices going up, or a death in the family. They're all the same decision making and decisive process to deal with adversity and chaos and crisis.
There's so much we could explore there. We really could. There's so much that we could explore, but I'm going to move us on a little bit. Another one of my favorite quotes about leadership is leaders who don't listen will eventually surround themselves with people who don't speak. One of my favorite quotes about leadership, which brings me on to my next question. I'm going to start with you, Troy. Why do leaders eventually stop hearing the truth? Why do they insulate themselves from good and wise counsel?
I made a point about being a dictator earlier, uh, not unintentionally, because I remember I was talking about this previously and hoping that it would come back around. So success on me. You mentioned humility a moment ago. That's a word that you used, Paul.
Mm-hmm.
And in the very best of character, if you cannot maintain your humility, right, and you become so confident because of your success that you begin to think you have all of the answers, you end up being the person that you are describing, Paul. And I don't think anybody can go through a career and progress, through different levels of management and leadership. It's more difficult to maintain your humility and be able to listen and gain perspective than it is to isolate yourself because you become so confident in your abilities and your extraordinary exponential path to success. It's more difficult to maintain your humility. And so if I could add a leadership trait to anything, it would be to put humility in there, right? Because you have to always have at least one person in the room that can go, yeah, that didn't smell right. Right. That person's more valuable than the person
Mm,
who thinks it's important to bring you your favorite coffee in the morning. As anybody seen Devil Wears Prada?
yeah.
There's a person in Meryl Streep's character who's lost all humility,
Yeah.
right? I won't go too deep in it, but that's why that's such a great movie. Don't be like that.
Yeah.
Understand that you have to learn humility to be successful. Then you don't surround yourself with yes people. Those companies, those organizations are doomed to failure. Doomed to failure.
Troy, I'm going to stick with you just for a moment before I go to John, because you make really brilliant points there. But sometimes the very somebody described it the other day, the other day they were talking about a particular leader, and they said that this person emits very high voltage, even though they didn't intend to. The person had achieved the sort of zenith of their particular profession, and everyone admired them, and they could not help but emit high voltage. How does how do how do leaders engage effectively with people in such a way that they will continue to feed back to the leader true and honest and wise and thoughtful counsel, whilst at the same time having to manage the aura that is being emitted from a leader?
If there were a perfect answer to that question, Paul, right? I think this is so there's science and there's art. We have books. John is much better than I am at reciting leadership scripture, I'll call it, right? And examples of people who we listen to. The science of leadership we have been has been written about for eons. Even if someone reads the science,
Hmm.
can they put it into practice as an art? And I think the question you're asking about looking for answer to is not the science of leadership, but the
Hmm.
art of leadership. Likewise, if we take the model of every leader's responsibility is to develop leaders, whether they do or not, the science tells us that if they do that, then it's incumbent upon us who are being led and developed to also practice our art. And the hardest thing about being a leader is also being is understanding that you're also an advisor. Everyone's got a boss. And the more successful advisor that you can be, which is predominantly what my roles are as in my position in my career, is being the advisor. I mentioned courage a moment ago, and courage isn't only about running in the middle of the street to save the person, right? It's the decision to do it, not the act of doing it, right? Is being able to tell someone that is a good decision, it's a bad decision, it's a good idea, it's a bad idea, knowing the repercussions might be negative. This is emotional. It takes courage to do that. You must also be decisive and dependable and have bearing and be unselfish and be loyal and have enthusiasm and endurance. All the things we talked about as leadership traits a moment ago. But I think the art of advising is more an art than it is a science. I would say leadership is more of a science than it is an art. Without getting to some fine tuning of that, right? The art of advising is an art. There aren't a lot of good books on advising. There are a lot of great books on leading.
Good point.
That is a brilliant point. That is a brilliant point. John, your reflections on leaders who eventually stop hearing the truth, who insulate themselves from wise counsel.
Absolutely. So both in business and in the military, I'd say most if not all. I hesitate to say all because my mentor said almost nothing, not nothing, but almost nothing is true always.
Yeah.
And so, but most business problems, business or military problems, are at the end of the day people problems, right? Most people problems are relationship problems. Most relationship problems are communication problems. And so, but we talked about trust, accountability, and communication. Somewhere when people stop hearing the truth, my shortest three-word answer would be either somewhere ego or their own agenda come into play. But basically, they got out of alignment. Somebody got out of alignment somewhere. But when you think about where trust breaks down most often, it's somewhere in the communication. The communication broke down. So we misunderstood somebody one way or the other, someone misunderstood what someone was saying, or they were offended, rightly or mistakenly, they were offended, and so it throws it off. But short story, I think if we're talking about the senior leader, the senior most leader in the organization stopping hearing the truth, I, often it's ego or just I'm gonna, my way, Frank Sinatra, I did it my way. Troy talked early about team. It's all about the team. And so, but short story again, all these points illustrate the importance of tying everything back to the if you tie everything back to the vision, mission, and value of the organization, if you're developing leaders, if you are continually mobilizing people around the common cause is the mission. If you're making clear the commander's intent, um, and but Patrick Lencioni talks about the ultimate team member has things that we've talked about indirectly today. They're humble, hungry. Hungry means continuing to want to be a lifelong learner and grower, continue to work on themselves. They're hungry, they may be wealthy and they may have it all, but they're still hungry to keep growing, right? And three, hungry, humble, and smart. But smart means emotionally and morally, emotional intelligence and competence. To Troy's point, to Troy's point about there's the science, but there's the actual practical application, the doing. So there's emotional intelligence, moral intelligence. That's the knowing. To Troy's point, emotional competence and emotion and moral competence is the doing. If you're in alignment with true north and you're humble, hungry, and smart, you're going to be like a Troy E. Black, who as an E9 plus, my term, Sergeant Major of the Marine Corps, you're still seeking advice. You're asking those that came before you. You're trying to stand on shoulders of giants. Somebody said, I only saw so far because I was standing on shoulders of giants. And so humble, hungry, and smart is preventative medicine to stop hearing the truth. There's also an important part. You have to have the filter to know the truth when you hear it. So am I hearing the truth or is someone misleading me? I think that's an important factor of that as well. Not only so to fully hear the truth, to internalize the truth and take action on it, you have to recognize that it is the truth.
That's brilliant. Uh, I'm mindful that we're on the home straight, gentlemen. So I'm going to move on to my next thought here, which is, I mean, essentially, what really creates a genuine sense of belonging. I think a lot of the things that we've spoken about in this podcast have focused on not just, in terms of particularly in terms of the impact of the leader, not just what people do as a result of how a leader behaves and conducts themselves, but this is a really interesting perspective because when you think about what really creates a genuine sense of belonging, that's not just about what people do, it's about how you make them feel. And this is truly a unique aspect of elite leadership. And I really do want to explore it with you because it is that level deeper than my examples and what I do. I have impacted you to the extent that how you feel about being in my presence, how you feel about this team, how you feel about this workforce creates a sense of ownership, a sense of belonging, a sense of affiliation. What really creates a genuine sense of belonging? John, can I just start with you on that?
Yeah, sure. So earlier we talked about hungry, humble, and smart, but we also talked about trust in leadership. And so I would ask your audience, I'd ask everybody, the two of you and everyone listening or watching, to picture in your head the best leader from any walk of life, at any age of life, just who you would consider the best leader you ever had. And then also picture somebody you had a problem with, or someone that you would consider a poor leader. Get those two faces, heads in your conscious, and ask yourself three questions about each of them. So one, could I or can I trust them? Do they care about me? Are they committed to excellence? 99% of the time, 99% of the audiences around the world um, answer yes to at least two, if not all three, to the great leader, the best leader they ever had, and at least two, if not three, no's to the poor leader. So, can I trust them? Do they care about me? How do they make me feel? Are they committed to excellence, not just for the organization, not just for themselves, but in developing me? Like, do they make me feel that I belong in this organization? Again, back to alignment. Are they helping me get what I want for myself in alignment with my values and my moral compass, but also in alignment with the organization? Are they trustworthy? And are they committed to excellence, and do they care about me? When all three of those exist, it makes the path forward easier.
I can always tell when Troy has a thought because he leans forward. He leans forward,
He's
and I know that
drawing the audience in. They're on the edge of their seat too.
Troy, you have the mic.
Always lean into the problem, right? Um, and just for the benefit of the listeners, restate the question one more time, please.
The question is what creates a genuine sense of belonging?
While John was talking, it came to my mind to do a little compare and contrast. And so I pulled up Steve Jobs and Bernard Montgomery, right? Why those two? Because if anyone's either a business historian or a military historian, probably two of the most volatile personalities would be Steve Jobs in the business world, and not Paul, not because you're sitting in the UK right now, but I'm a big fan of General Montgomery, but volatile. Both have been represented in history for their personalities. Why did people follow them?
Right.
Right? Um, I think for the same reasons that John has told us, it's vision and values first and foremost.
Mhm.
If you are Steve Jobs, no matter what you think of his history and how he got where he's at, the one thing he could do was inspire. Harshly, probably a little bit more on the I know better than you do, not a consensus guy, right? But he was so precise in his vision that people were energized. They were enthusiastic. They took risk because he was so energetic and visionary. General Montgomery, discipline, 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 discipline. Even under the horrors of combat and warfare, discipline, discipline, discipline. What's the point? There are varying things that will inspire people to follow a leader. But here's something that I don't think applies only to military. And we say it sometimes off the cuff. Is it more important to be liked or to be respected? The answer for everybody is, oh, I
To be
want both.
respected, yeah.
The fact of the matter is, very rarely do you get a combination of both.
Yeah.
You are either liked or you are respected. I would offer in all of our experience, maybe all the conversations that you've had with so many different people in this space, it is respect that probably supersedes likeness every day of the week.
Absolutely.
That is an art. That is not a science.
Yeah.
It's completely outside human emotion to be respected and not liked,
Mm.
right?
Mhm.
We want people to like us.
Yes.
But what makes the task at hand continue to move and to succeed is to respect. And you cannot have, fundamentally, last point, you can have people that you like and don't trust. I mentioned the car example a moment ago.
Mm.
I got great friends. I would never get in a car with them. I do not trust them behind the wheel,
Mm.
right? But what you can't have is trust without respect.
Mm.
You can have like without trust. You can't have trust without respect.
Mm.
So I don't know how to define that in scientific terms. I just know that so few people have such an exceptional ability, so innovative. Exponential growth comes from a very few people who are artists. They write science. They are the ones who write the books that we so much want to have all the answers of life to. They don't often follow the path of the books written about the very same topic. They
Mm.
create them. And so I'll just leave it there, but I think it's a hard question to ask. I really do, or answer.
And your insights and perspectives, Troy, are really, really powerful. I wasn't, to be honest with you, I wasn't expecting, I wasn't expecting to get the answer. I mean, I think just the quality of conversation, the opportunity for us to back and forth ideas on leadership, I think is really valuable. Let me just go to the last question that I had for you both. And again, I'll start with you, Troy. And it's looking at how organizations hire. And I've been through more hiring processes than I would care to mention. But do organizations sometimes fall into the trap of hiring for competence or hiring for comfort? And is it easy for an organization to veer into the sort of the comfort zone? I like this person. I seem to get on with them. They share some of my interests and other pursuits. Is it easy sometimes for organizations to be seduced into comfort over competence?
Yes. And this is what a great question because now that you've asked the question, I might have inserted that into my answer a moment ago about likeness,
Mm-hmm.
right, versus respect,
Right.
right? We are human beings. And John, pull out your long list of well-read books that say always hire someone because they are competent. Never hire them because you like them. Then you meet someone, and lo and
Yep.
behold, it's the same question of trying to say, what's the system for hiring someone's um, propensity for the future? We only have the past to judge someone whether they're going to be competent in the future, right? So we assume a few things. But I think I think the very best leaders, at some point in time, they hire people, probably at the lower level. Who are you hiring? I would say we probably hire into organizations competence first. And as we become more senior, we assume competence, right? And we hire more for the relationship. Maybe it's not an either or. And I'm the worst person to ask questions about either or. I know the answer is not neither nor. I would offer it's probably not either or, it's probably both and.
Mm-hmm.
What I would offer to our earlier point and then pass it over because I can see the time is I think an organization that is hiring and wanting to develop successive leadership, you have to do both and even at the beginning. I don't just need an architect. I need an architect who may have some leadership, some some empathy, some other characteristic other than straight A from Harvard Business School, right? I need something more than that. Or I'm responsible for developing it, both and.
John, fulfill the requirement or fit in. Just picking up on Troy's point. Which is it?
Yes, so most organizations, I think, competence includes talent and skill sets. So we deal at Decision Reflex, we deal with largely high performing. They have higher things they need to accomplish, and they're not problem free. No organization is problem free ever, but they have gotten to the point where they know how to hire for talent and skill sets. Their talent and skill sets in professional organizations, even not even, but including the Marine Corps, like not just sometimes contrary to common belief, but not anybody can get into the Marine Corps. And but so you have to have some level. We work with a lot of financial service, financial planning, wealth management organizations. You have to have some level of talent and skill set as table stakes to that's competence, right? What they don't realize is that decision making has twice the impact of talent and on performance long term, twice the impact on performance than talent and skill sets combined. I'm not saying that talent and skill sets aren't important. I'm saying that they're not as important as things like decision making,
Yeah.
including under pressure, as we've talked about today. So, but I think so also who's who's doing the hiring? High performing individuals with high performance gives a certain level of confidence. And so every leader in financial services over my 37 years or whatever it is thinks that they're good at hiring. Well, the science, to Troy's part, shows that interviewing alone is the least predictive measure of success long term of a person in the organization. So what have I talked about throughout this podcast? Values, vision, mission, values, why. So what we have found, again, evidence-based scientifically, is there's certain assessments. There's a lot of assessments out there, but there are certain ones that are very predictive, not only on success for that particular role, but also coaching points, like how the leader to coach and develop that individual that don't change. They're inherent to that individual. And so relying on interviewing alone, I like this guy. They've got some things in common. They seem to be, they do some of the things that we do already. They say they're in alignment with us. Of course they are. They're interviewing. But so Troy mentioned the importance of values, like, but hiring managers get ahead of themselves and they have some pressure to meet the numbers to recruit and say, "Hey, I found this great guy. Let's pull the trigger. Let's make an offer." Versus what would be wrong with having them take a values exercise, showing that you care about them and their development? What would be wrong taking an assessment that shows what percentage fit you are for this role and what's going to be really important in your development so that you can feel like you belong in our organization. So Troy talked, hey, Paul, we like you. We care about you. We want to develop you. We think you can be successful in our organization because of A, B, and C. we think it's going to be really important for you to get to where you want to be, for you to allow us to help you develop in X, Y, and Z. Can you get what you want for yourself with our organization in alignment with your vision, mission, values, true north, your why, but also in alignment with our vision, mission, values, true north, and why? And so then, if the answer to all that is yes, and they have role clarity, role and responsibility clarity, they have a career path, they understand what's in it for them and how their leader is going to help them get there, wherever there is, because most people want to perform better than their organizations need them to be, minimally at least. And to your point about belonging, everyone wants to be part of something bigger than themselves. When it's in alignment, that's where you can get a true sense of belonging, because it's about a common cause that's that's really important to the organization and to the individual. Common cause. So I'll pull up there.
Thank you so much, John. I know that Troy's leaning forward, but I'm gonna, unless there's something that Troy absolutely wants to say, I'm going to invite him instead to offer a couple of reflections, Troy, based on the podcast so far. And then I'm going to invite you, John, just to offer just a couple of reflections.
Yeah.
Um, Paul, you're gonna make note of this because you already have. We've talked about leadership, leadership development. We talked about crisis response. We talked myriad of topics. We've talked about the art and the science of developing leaders or managing organizations or making decisions. All of those things. There is no replacement for trust.
Mm.
And as I just took notes, and I'm a mad scribbler, that I wrote down the number of times I think, and someone's going to screen the podcast now and put it through Chat GPT and prove me wrong. But I've got almost 30 plus times the word trust has been mentioned in this conversation. And every time we've reflected or we've passed it back off, or John and I, or even you and your questions have come back around, it has always been guided by when someone mentions trust and places it in one of the myriad categories or questions that you asked. So I think that's where I would leave anybody if they only listen to the first 5 minutes and last 5 minutes of your podcast. Trust is not inherent. Trust has to be purchased in time and effort and resources
Absolutely.
and development and recruiting and all of those things. This is the magic of being in an organization led by elite leaders. They
Mm.
understand that it is trust.
Mm.
Trust, number one. Thanks, Paul, for the time. Thanks for everything that you're doing. And it's been a great time. Thank you.
John, any thoughts, any final reflections?
Quickly, I'll be somewhat brief. So
Okay.
one lighthearted, one humorous, and one serious. So I'll jump in. The humorous. So this is maybe the most unscientific but completely accurate measure of whether your listeners have built an elite culture or on the path. Has anyone tattooed your company logo all over their body? So think about it. There are really only, excuse me, there are really only two organizations in the world that I know of where customers, employees, former employees voluntarily, permanently ink the brand on their skin: the United States Marine Corps and Harley Davidson. I'm not talking about brand loyalty, I'm talking about identity, belonging. Do you think these guys with sleeves felt at some point, at least in their career, that they belonged in the Marine Corps? And even some of them will say they belonged in combat. That's another story. Harley Davidson, um, but esprit de corps so deep that it literally becomes part of who you are. So, if you want a simple culture diagnostic, forget the engagement survey. Just ask yourself, is anyone tattooing your logo on their body? If not, you may have some work to do. Now, go ahead, Paul, if you want
No,
to
no,
chime
no, no. Carry on, John.
in. The serious side. So a lot of people in the last 20, 30 years have talked about emotional competence, emotional intelligence, emotional competence. Decision reflex, we spend a good amount of time. Also, we definitely talk about emotional competence, emotional intelligence. We also add a layer of moral intelligence and moral competence. One of my mentors has written two books on the subjects, also did a study, longitudinal study over a couple decades, a couple thousand financial advisors specifically. What they found is what they found at the end of the study was that financial advisors with retail clients that operated their business and made decisions and recommendations to their clients with moral competence, moral intelligence, and moral competence. So they operated their business. Troy uses the term ethically, legally, and morally. Those financial advisors actually got a couple percentage points, what the industry calls alpha. They actually got a couple, in addition to more important things, but they got a couple percentage points more performance in their clients' portfolios than those that did not operate morally on top of everything else. So specifically, all the major, I'm not here to talk about religion at all, but a point is that all the major religions across the world, across history, there are some universally moral principles that we tie into our development of people and development of cultures. And those, not, this is not an exhaustive, comprehensive list, but they include integrity, compassion, responsibility, and forgiveness. Forgiveness is a less obvious one, but it comes into play in a lot of what we talked about today. But when businesses and leaders operate on top of everything else we talked about, but in decision making, especially under pressure, when character matters, part of that true north, that moral compass includes things like, are you operating with integrity, responsibility, 360 degrees, compassion, and forgiveness? So that moral compass is practical and real and applicable and important. But let's keep it simple for a second. For your listeners, what can they take away from this? If you do nothing more than sit down and do an exercise of figuring out, bringing top of your consciousness today in 2026, what your current top 5 or 6 values are and how you can put verbs in front of them and live in alignment with them more often. Nobody's perfect, but progress over progression. So that's one of the ways that we can, make check ourselves and make sure we're in alignment. It can include more. I think you or Troy said something early on about, it's a deeper category, but our ideal self, who we ideally would like to be on our best days, in the alignment model that we utilize with our clients and ourselves. Um, Values, but guiding principles. Troy talked about, JJ did, Ty Buckle. Those are character traits, they're leadership traits, but they can be guiding principles as well. And so, whatever it is for your listeners, for some people, it includes scripture, right? Wisdom, capital W, bold, but values, guiding principles, moral compass that can become our true north. And a lot of the problems or potential problems that we talked about today, character flaws, come from getting out of alignment with our true north. So something to work on every day. Am I check myself? Am I living, how can I live in alignment today with my true north, make a decision and then live in alignment with that? I can get closer to everything that I want for myself when I do that.
Thank you so much, John. And in the final sort of 60 seconds of this podcast, Troy, can you just say a little bit to our listeners? You're new to the 11th Thing podcast. Can you just say a little bit about yourself for our listeners? And then, John, I'll give you the mic for the remaining sort of 30 seconds.
Humility. What would I say about myself? Uh, I'm a father. I'm a dad. I'm a believer. I've had the honor to serve tens of thousands of people, and that number isn't stated to give influence, but I pinch myself every day, thinking about the opportunities that I've given, and I hope, um, through all that, I've been able to touch a few people and help them and pay it forward like so many have done for me. So, if anyone wants to know about me, Google me and you'll see my bio. But from my perspective, helping people uh, is a gift and a blessing.
Thank you, Troy. And John.
Yeah, so I don't have a Wikipedia page like Troy E. Black does, but yes, I can. And I don't know if everything is 100% always kept accurate on Wikipedia. I can't speak to that. One interesting quick thing, when if people are interested in the Marine Corps does not easily hand out medals and ribbons. They're actually notorious for being stingy. Some people get the wrong impression. Maybe some other services hand them out a little more liberally. I don't know, but on Troy's Wikipedia page, he is humble, but if you start clicking on the Wikipedia page on his ribbons and read what those were, or the definition of what that award is awarded for, especially the top three before you even get to the Bronze Star with Valor, there's a few for exceptionally meritorious service at high levels of leadership within the military. That's not how they word it, but that's close. So, um, I just want to leave your listeners with why I do what I do. So I find nothing professionally more fulfilling, my other than my family. I find nothing more fulfilling than helping people get what they really truly importantly want for themselves without sacrificing their values, their true north, their relationships, or their health, or their soul. And so some of the things that we've talked about today, we for decades we've helped people do that. Live in alignment means getting what you like, aligning your actions, your behaviors, your predominant thoughts with what's most important in life to you, and then making sure that that's in alignment with your true north, your moral compass, your values, your guiding principles, more often. And we can help you do that, and it would be our honor and privilege to help whoever finds value in that do that. On the not to mention another podcaster, but on if you've ever listened to the Sean Ryan show with his guests, not always, but almost always, he says at the end of people's bio, he says, and most importantly, a Christian. And so I would say that most importantly, a Christian. I almost on another podcast, I kind of did a reverse order. I think my wife probably didn't love this, but I did add not. I said not in this order, but I do have nine grandchildren, three kids in law, their spouses, five or six dogs. I don't know. My wife's puppy had. So we have seven little puppies now and one wife, not in that order, but Christian, husband, father, grandfather, dog owner, and friend of Troy Black and Paul L. Danica.
Thank you so much, Troy. Just to concur with John, by any definition of greatness, you're a great man, and I am so grateful to you for the honor and privilege of having the opportunity to have you on this podcast, and also to you, John Nair, for joining me. Thank you so much, John and Troy, for this episode of the 11th Thing podcast.
Thanks,
Thank
Paul.
you. Thank you, Paul. Really appreciate you and all you do.
Thanks for watching.